Good afternoon, everyone. Anybody who's listening online, this is High Point Mayor Jay Wagner calling to order our special meeting for today. Our purpose of the meeting is a budget work session. I'm here at City Hall. Also present at City Hall are Councilman Jones and Hudson. I believe we have Councilman Britt Moore on the phone. And then some others hopefully will be trickling in, but we're going to go ahead and get started. And so I'll begin by giving the floor to our city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Members of council, there were a couple of follow-up items from our first budget work session that staff has prepared responses. We were specifically asked what would be the impact of things that we may need to consider if there was an additional tax increase as part of our budget. When we put together these options for council to consider, we tried to think about things that were one-time expenses that could be cut from the budget, but also thinking about those things that were recurring expenses, because we know those are things that we would have to make sure we can continue to fund regardless of where we set our tax rate. In addition to looking at those particular decreases, we also wanted to give council an idea of the major drivers that had to be considered as part of this budget that are impacting the rate that was recommended. But this time, I will turn it over to our budget director, and we'll begin this presentation. And if there are other questions that arise as we're going through, we'll be more than happy to address those as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the City Council. Just several topics, as the City Manager alluded to. The first few are just responses to questions from our last work session, and then kind of just review of our major total budget drivers. So at our last work session, there was a question about potential property tax relief that is available to citizens of High Point. And so researching on the Guilford County Tax Office's website, we did find 3 options of property tax relief that is currently available via application through the tax office. The first is the elderly or disabled exclusion. And the criteria for this is it excludes the first $25,000 or 50% of the appraised value. It's available to owners who are 65 or older or permanently disabled, and it cannot have previous year income exceeding $31,900. Another type of property tax relief is the disabled veteran exclusion. This excludes the first $45,000 of appraised value, but there is no age or income limitation. And then the last one is called the circuit breaker property tax deferment. So there's a little bit more going on with this one. This has taxes limited to a percentage of a qualifying owner's income. The criteria are the owner must be 65 years or older or permanently disabled. If their previous year's income does not exceed $31,900, their property taxes will be limited to 4% of the owner's income. If their previous year's income exceeded $31,900 but was less than 150% of their income eligibility limit, for 2021 was $47,850. Their property tax dollars will be limited to 5% of the owner's income. I do want to note that those that qualify for this, their taxes over the limitation are deferred, but they do remain a lien on the property. And what that means is if there was a disqualifying event, such as the death of the owner, a transfer of the property, or a failure of the owner to use the property as their permanent residence, the last 3 years of deferred taxes and interest would be due. I will note that the first 2 cannot be combined with the circuit breaker. And so the information for these is available on the Guilford County Tax Office website, but I've discussed with our marketing division, and we're going to work to kind of link it on the city's website and make the information available for any High Point residents that may be looking for this information. The next question at last week's work session had to do with kind of what options would be available if the proposed property tax rate was decreased an additional 2 cents. And just so for reference, the proposed property tax rate in the proposed budget is 61.75 cents per $100 of valuation. 1 cent on the tax rate generates $1,275,482 in property tax revenue. So an additional 2 cent decrease would bring the City of High Point tax rate to 59.75 cents. But to achieve that, it would require a reduction in general fund revenues of slightly over $2.5 million. I will note very briefly, at the first budget presentation, we talked a little bit about how what happens with the tax rate has an effect on our sales tax distribution. There was a question about the 61.75 cents, what that would do to the FY24 impact. That number was about $750,000, going down an additional 2 cents, depending on what the other jurisdictions do, mainly Greensboro and Guilford, could result in increasing that loss of sales tax up to $1.263 million. Again, that's very contingent on what Guilford and Greensboro do. That they received 89% of the total tax distribution. So what they do with their property tax rate can affect ours, in addition to what we do with our property tax rate. And so I just wanted to reference that because that is kind of a year after effect, depending on what happens with the proposed rate.
So I'm assuming that the vote on Tuesday is going to affect what happens with county property tax rate.
I would speculate, yes. My understanding from their agenda for this evening is they'll be proposing their budget tonight. I believe Greensboro's budget will be proposed on Monday, and so we'll have a lot more information after those are presented. So in addition to options to reach an additional 2-cent decrease, we tried to go slightly over that $2.55 million that would be needed. The new positions that were requested would be taken out, the 2 assistant city attorney positions, the paralegal position, and the 2 battalion fire chief positions. Another option to include would be reducing the outside agency funding to the 21-22 level. That increased as the value of penny increased, but it would not decrease the amount that was allocated in the current year. The proposed budget restored general capital, and of that general capital, $1.422 million was funded by tax dollars. And so if we deferred that or looked for other ways to fund it, that could help achieve additional savings. And also the same kind of idea with the engine replacement for the fire department. This was an apparatus replacement program that we're trying to restore. We're going from zero to a lot of dollars, and so that's something that we could potentially defer. We did talk about our year-end projections have us likely adding the fund balance. We did talk about potentially doing a mid-year budget amendment for capital. And so if we did defer the fire department truck or the general capital, we would relook at all our capital requests, prioritize that, and then depending how we end the year, potentially bring an amendment later in the year or continue to look for other funding sources. The next couple of slides are just reiterating some of the major total budget drivers. So this is across all funds. The first 2 were the retention and recruitment items that were approved by City Council back in February, the 2.5% COLA and the increase to a minimum hourly rate of pay of $15 an hour. Those together total almost over $3.1 million. The average 3% mid-year merit pay adjustment, $1.8 million. Increase to benefits contributions, and this ranges from increases to the city's health plan, elders retirement, among others. That totals over $4.4 million. And then the new positions, and again, this is citywide across all funds, 11 full-time and 3 part-time positions, and that dollar amount totals $1.2 million.
Do you have a breakdown of those 14 positions?
We do. Do we have the prior presentation, or we can send those?
We can provide that.
We can provide
I have a hard copy if there's specific questions about it.
Okay. Is it in the budget
It is in the budget document. The ones that were,
conveniently?
it is. I can see if I can find the page for you.
Okay. You got it. Just tell me what page it is. No.
Open.
M7.
All the ones
Okay, I got
impacting the general fund were on that first page, and the others were in our enterprise funds.
Okay. These right here.
It shows right there.
Gotcha.
The ones on the lower end are enterprise funds.
Gotcha.
So the ones on the, if you'll go back to the previous slides, see? The assistant city attorney positions, the paralegal, and the battalion chief positions are those that impact the general fund. The other positions that are listed as part of the budget message for kind of water and sewer, those are covered by your enterprise fund and sanitation.
Gotcha.
So adjusting, making changes to those positions wouldn't necessarily impact our tax rate.
Tax rate. Okay. All right. Thanks.
On the operating side, fuel is the biggest driver of increases in operating. we've all seen it. Prices have continued to inch up, and so that totals $3.8 million. That's a combination of two things. It's increased fuel costs within the department budgets, but also in our fleet services budget. They have kind of a line item for fuel inventory, and so that kind of doubles up that. Fleet charges for replacement vehicles and rolling stock. We attempted to start inching that replacement amount a little higher based on what was requested versus kind of what dollars are available, totaling $1.1 million. And that's the increase, not the total amount. Increased costs for utilities, electric, water, sewer, phone lines, natural gas, that totals slightly over $700,000. And then some inflationary increases in some certain accounts, supplies, chemicals, et cetera, totaling $833,000. Capital and capital outlay is also a large increase, driving the increase in the budget. The restoration of the fire apparatus replacement program, those are the two pieces of equipment that would be replaced next year. Additional fleet rolling stock, we attempted to build that up another $1 million. The restoration of general capital, and so that totals $2.5 million, but $1.1 million of that is funded by the enterprise funds. And so that's why a few slides ago when we had the cuts, it was 1.4 million. So the 1.4 million is what's supported by property tax dollars. And then other fund capital, water, sewer, electric, solid waste, really the enterprise funds, their increases in capital total slightly over $6.9 million. And then lastly, just some other expenses, debt service year over year, about $1.1 million. Reimbursements, this is mostly our indirect cost allocation. So what indirect cost is water sewer pays a slight percentage of their budget back to the general fund to cover things like the attorney's office budget or the financial services department budget. And so if the general fund's going up, those reimbursements are going to go up for some of those enterprise funds. And then interfund transfers up almost $11.6 million. This kind of covers almost what some of the other increases are. If water sewers capital is increased by $2 million, the transfer from water sewer to cover that capital would also be up $2 million, but that does drive the total increase year over year, and so that's why I included it on that slide.
What is our, Eric or anybody, what is our general, how long do we keep these fire trucks before we replace them?
Yeah, typically it's a 15-year first line service, and then it goes into a backup status on most of these trucks.
Okay.
That's fairly typical.
And how many trucks do we have? Do you know off the top of your head? Ballpark. Ballpark it.
25 to 30, I'm
Yeah.
going to say. We have 14 stations. Some stations have multiple trucks.
Yeah. All right.
And just a quick follow-up on that, the engine range is about $750,000. If we had to replace a ladder truck, that's, pushing closer to $1.5 million. So that's the kind of main content of the slides. Just the next steps. In addition to this work session, there's an if necessary work session scheduled for Monday, May 23rd. And we've listed Monday, June 6th as a potential budget adoption at city council meeting. Obviously, that would depend on kind of how the discussions go and be at the discretion of the city council. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Floor's open.
It's Councilman Moore.
Go ahead, Brett.
Yes, what effect, I think, tonight, the Guilford County, I believe, revealed some information on theirs as far as the timing of setting our, final budget. What impact and what are staff thoughts on waiting to see and what influence and impact their decision can have after, there was speculation that if the school bond sales tax passed, that one thing might happen, and if it didn't, another might happen. So the voters have decided to pass the bond, but not the sales tax. So what implications, ramifications can that have upon our citizens and our planning of release of our budget?
Councilmember Moore, this is Steve. By law, we have until June 30th for city council to approve a budget. But in terms of the timing of what the county does or how they do it, that doesn't affect, you don't have to wait for the county to release their budget or for them to have a certain date. If you wanted to see what they did with their budget, again, that'd be at city council's discretion, but there's nothing we need to do to wait on the county in moving forward this budget.
One thing we do have to be mindful of is the impact of the tax rate, and if the county does not reduce their tax rate, what that does to our sales tax distributions. And Steve mentioned that impact a few moments ago.
Right.
So there's a potential for us
Thank-
to see a reduction in the amount of sales tax revenue that we receive for the city if we reduce our tax rate and then the county does not.
And to follow up
Well,
on the last
I-
question, it was 27 fire trucks. I said
27
25 to 30,
27
it's
trucks.
27.
5:30.
I knew you'd get it right. It's not a public hearing. No. Right. You're welcome to contact any of us after the meeting's over. Guys?
That's the same question that I was asking with Brett is,
Oh.
do we have a chance after we see the county tax to see what cards are there as well?
I think
So
there's,
we can
You can.
readjust.
You can adjust up until the time it's adopted.
yeah, I think, given that the quarter cent sales tax didn't pass Tuesday, I mean, just from what I've read, they're probably not going to reduce, and there could be, in fact, be an increase. So, but we're not, I don't know what their time frame is about whether they're going to try to go ahead and do it in June or, in early June, or if they're going to wait till late June.
Doesn't that part of it have to be passed by? Well, you don't have the bandwidth to do it.
You mean the bond capacity? I think that it already has to be pre-approved before you can even get it on the ballot, right?
Yeah,
By the LGC.
that's correct. And then as they issue each series of bonds, they'll go through a process with the LGC to determine capability to pay back the bonds.
Yeah. And then, typically, I guess they don't issue all the bonds at once. They're going to be, and this is going to be a long process of rebuilding all these schools, so, they'll, I guess you kind of try to cash flow it as you go, but they're not going to be selling them all at once.
Yeah, similar to what we did with our last bond authorization, issuing in 3 series. So it's not all.
Anybody have any questions about what we heard today? Any proposals other than what are your thoughts?
It's a challenge. The vote Tuesday pretty much sums up municipal government. That's the truth. We want more service, but we don't want to pay for it. It's a very tough position when you say we want bond for over $1 billion, but we're not going to give you any options to pay for it. Position that we're in a lot of times. The only thing left is property tax.
Yeah, they gave us an option. It was the property owner.
Say that again, Brett.
They gave us an option. It was the property owner.
Yeah.
And that, and subsequently, you can expect rents across Guilford County to go up.
Property tax is always the last common denominator.
Can we go back to slide four, please? From the discussion from staff so that we're preparing, is there any appetite for council to make any of the adjustments as we're looking at our rate? Just going through these, we realize that we have some capacity challenges with our our legal office just being able to be properly staffed to handle the volume of work that comes in. There were conversations, I do believe, last year about the paralegal positions, the assistant city attorney position. I initially recommended one. And then we're just trying to balance the workload there. The two battalion chief positions, we had started on a process 3 years ago to try to reduce the amount of overtime and make sure we had staffing levels where those were needed in the fire departments, but we do continue to use overtime to handle that currently. And for the general capital projects, in last year's budget, we did not have the capital projects in there. We did a mid-year adjustment. I do think there will be some flexibility to do that again later this year, but that's just an unknown at this point. But all of these have some kind of impact on how we operate and how we're able to continue moving projects forward. And
In excess of the 3.
that's already been
Increase.
proposed. It would be in excess of that. Again, the only one-time expenditures that you have in there are the general capital projects and then also the replacement of it. Long-term, we have to keep in mind that what that does for our fire rating insurance.
Cutting those two out would actually get us pretty close.
It would get, and those are non-recurring
Yeah.
expenses.
Now, which general capital projects are we talking about? Do we have a breakdown of those?
We have a specific breakdown of the 1.4.
Oh, those listed in an earlier presentation. And that 1.4 is pretty much wiping it out completely.
Yeah, but I mean, I just want to know what those are.
Type of,
Yeah,
What are we wiping out completely?
some of the highlights, some renovations to City Hall, improvements at Moorhead Recreation Center, Southside Recreation Center, fire alarm upgrades at Oak Hollow Golf Course and a couple of recreation centers, some paving at one of the cemeteries, some substandard streets maintenance, reimbursement for Ski Club Road sidewalks, some improvements to Mendenhall Terminal. There was nothing
No,
involved in the
it's
library
already
in the
done.
proposed
It's already
capital.
done.
That may be the whole list.
Yeah, I think
we had, yeah.
they're on page MM18.
That Eric Almeida knows everything
By
backwards
page.
and forwards.
Have you looked at this book before?
Uh-huh. It would be everything in here except for the ERP upgrade? Am I reading that right?
Yes. And the reason the ERP upgrade stays is that amount in the proposed budget is not funded by any tax dollars. It's funded by contributions from the enterprise funds.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, I mean, my thought on I think council's in our discussion before has been in agreement about expanding the legal department. I think that's a capacity issue. You might want to chime in, but I know that Megan works very, very hard, and I think she would like to have some help.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
I don't mean to put you on the
no,
spot.
it's what we've talked about, I think, for a couple of years. Even, I think, with bringing me in 3 years ago was to, over the next few years, slowly expand and take on more capacity. We've looked at other jurisdictions across the state, similar in population size and similar in programs, what they offer for services. And, we are certainly very slim as far as how we operate. So for other cities our size, the departments are a little bit bigger. I think we could, certainly benefit from having some additional work done in-house versus having to rely on outside counsel for a number of matters.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, spending that money, if we can bring more of what we're hiring outside counsel to do, may end up, I'm confident it will end up being an actual savings.
In the long run.
Then, because we spent around $1 million on outside counsel this year. Of course, we did, yeah, so we did, of course, we had, a couple of very,
Litigation matters.
very, very big litigation matters that are kind of out of the ordinary.
That's right. Like not recurring, complex,
Yeah.
matters that we've had to deal with. If you take out those maybe three that we've had ongoing, then for the more, routine work and to better service our clients, which is, council, the manager's office, the departments, that work is more recurring, which is why we would have the additional positions. I mean, you can never plan for,
Yeah.
when we're going to get sued or.
Yeah, I mean, specialized litigation is going to happen from time to time.
Right. That'll always be kind of a matter, a different matter, but dealing with the day in and day out work, certainly for a city our size and for the services that we offer and the number of departments that we have,
Yeah.
it would be appropriate to have at least another attorney, preferably two, and then certainly the support position in the
You're
paralegal.
going to have a paralegal. I mean, even if it saved us half of what we're spending now, we come out ahead. I'll bring in more of that in-house. But that, anyway, that's my thinking. I don't know what the thoughts of the rest of council are on that. That's why we're here, is to work on it.
Well, that's just one of the items that's not necessarily increasing funding. Very easy to justify. We're not outlaying all that money, we're offsetting another expense.
Is the chief still in the building? Greg, do you know? We could ask him for a little more information on these two battalion chief positions. He's smart, he probably ran out the door.
Mayor, while we're
Yes,
waiting on that, if it's all right, just, I know there's been a number of conversations, folks, regarding some of the work we might do to increase walkability.
Mhm.
So we've been looking at that, possible that at least have a discussion of this budget actually does or does not.
Somebody who could speak to that?
Greg is a person to speak to that, but I'll start. We actually have gone back. There was a study that was done. I do believe it came before the council at that time in 2014 that looked at improvements that could be made along Main Street. And that time, I'm not sure if it was just the design and how it was presented, but that wasn't fully supported. I think what we would need to do as an initial step would be for us to go back and revisit how we can have a more complete street design for that section of Main Street. It went from, I do believe, Lexington to Parkway, I do believe. And for us to begin the study there. Typically those can run you somewhere between, $60,000 to $100,000, which is not a significant amount of money for us to begin that work. And I think that we need to look at whether or not there are some improvements that can be made to the crosswalk. We actually had a conversation with a transportation consultant earlier this week about that, following the comments that we heard. And because of the width of the street, even if you're driving and you see the crosswalk, the caution lights tend to be out of your peripheral vision when you're approaching that stoplight. So are there ways to have an arm that extends over the road so people have a visual that's right in front of them? Those can be expensive, but that's a capital expense that we could bring back at some point. But I think if you really want to have a longer term solution of how do you address that, we need to revisit how do you have a more complete street along Main Street and in conjunction with business owners. And that's who we heard from at our meeting on Monday night. So those are individuals that we would go to as partners to help us talk about the message, help other business owners understand what's happening along that street. And then also understand how it might impact the flow of traffic as you're traversing one end of Main to the other access downtown. Because that also will become important for us as we think about what's needed to move trucks and freight during our markets. We want to make sure that we're doing those in conjunction with the market.
Those sound like great steps, and I appreciate you sharing that information. What would be our steps then, for what you said, the learning we need to do, the conversations and whatnot? Do we, I mean, at this point, is there anyone carrying the water on that project plan, so that way we can move forward on that?
Is, Rick, our deputy city manager has worked with our transportation department about how do we get that started.
Yeah, so we so this week we did meet with the Uptown Merchants Association, which has really not been meeting very frequently, but they have great interest at this point in time about a couple items. One, the plan for that area of town. They're seeing some new development happen. And then secondly, the mobility and walkability and pedestrian access, as we were discussing. What we requested them to do is to work with Visit High Point, located in that corridor, kind of reestablish the uptown merchants and bring them back together. For them to sit down and talk about what the desires are, and then approach the city, and we'll have someone designated as a liaison with the group. Certainly, there's some study to be done there. We're working on that crosswalk currently, looking at options. We made it to work for.
So the next steps are this group's coming together. They're gonna start meeting. What are our next steps though? I guess, city standpoint.
So the next steps for the city is to review what had been proposed previously for that corridor. Kind of take a fresh look at that, look at ways to maybe have that in phases, or certainly make a pedestrian crosswalk that's there safer or more visible. It's going to be incremental. There's not a budget associated with it at this time, so we've got to look at fund that. But certainly, we've heard what council's interests are, and certainly the public. So we'll start trying to identify those funds.
I think for,
So I think that's why I asked it,
For-
because we're in this budget session now.
for an initial assessment for us, we would need to be able to look at the existing study, and that would need to be updated. Typically, these studies can cost you somewhere between kind of that $60,000 to $100,000 range to get that started, for us to look at that. But then from there would be additional costs that we would have to allocate, especially once work is done. But if we want to start taking a look at the existing study that we have in partnership with the Uptown Association, what are the things they would like to see that we can update that? We would need to allocate funds to make that happen. That's not a significant,
Would that be updating the Kimley Horn study that was done like 10 years ago?
it would be.
And the other part of that too is there's the aesthetic part of the project, but then there's the utility part of the project. And you're going to spend the money and the time and create the disruption to do the aesthetic, then we need to have a total review of the utility components. And that includes the undergrounding of electric, includes the replacement of water and sewer in areas that are needed. And it really, it's a complete street type project. So it's not an easy or quick project, but it's one that it's got to be done comprehensively.
And there were two studies done back then. There was the traffic study that was done in conjunction with, doing a complete street there. And then Joe Minicozy did an economic impact study as well. And I'm guessing you'll have that. Those numbers are older, but do we have any idea, and I know there's nobody for transportation here, but do we have any idea what, I think the estimate 10 years ago was once I-74 opened that we could look, there would be a drop in traffic numbers along there. Have we done anything along Main Street that would lead us to believe that's true or not true?
We had this discussion a little bit about that on Monday, and there was not a traffic person there, but the reality is the complete street is not going to reduce traffic. We're going to have it roughly the same amount of traffic or maybe a little less. The issue is, the great thing for us is we do have some alternate streets.
Yeah.
So you do have some network, and network makes it possible to do the construction. But long-term, you're really not going to drive traffic numbers down. You're going to accommodate them in a different manner.
Yeah.
And to my knowledge, some representatives who were on this governing body, and that's how they recall that conversation happening as well, that the consultants were leading some of those studies. This is what they found, that traffic will be okay. Yeah. Because there was this fear that if we tried to do this, that it could have a negative impact on the businesses there in terms of traffic coming to them. But that study, based on what they recall,
That's right.
said it would not.
Yeah, they said it would function fine. It might, if you're driving from Walmart on South Main to Walmart on North Main, it might cost you an extra minute and a half or something. But I don't remember the exact amount of time, but that it was perfectly capable of handling it. And, what has been kicked around would be the idea of keeping the road maybe at the width it is, but allowing parking on the street at certain times. when there's lower demand, and that way during market, you have the full width of the street. But that'd be something we'd have to, look at for further study.
One of the
We would
biggest
also have
issues,
to evaluate how people access certain businesses along Main Street. There are several, if you're in that section, there are several driveway cuts to access businesses. That's something we would need to evaluate, how much parking would you be able to pick up, if you park on both sides of Main, and then how you access those.
There's so many driveway cuts along there and hydrants and bus stops. Once you start factoring all that in, it becomes questionable really how many spaces you gain.
right? So given the constraints that we're hearing about, but also given the information that I think we have at our disposal, I think it's incumbent upon us, or really, I'll speak from a personal lens, it's incumbent upon me to really ask, what do we feel like we need at a city management level to say, all right, we're going to jump into this effort really in a very intentional and I'd say pointed way, such that the public continues to see the progress that we're making on this. And there can be some sort of sunset on this project being completed, whether it's, obviously, I think we all know it'll be multiple years of this taking place. But I think at this point, it's been multiple years, from what I understand, of conversations. I think people would be fine with multiple years of us doing the work, but at this point, I've not seen the scope of work, the timeline, the budget that we're gonna put towards this. And if it's something that we've got to start with, a minor budgetary impact, to your point, Madam Manager, around 60 to 100K or whatever it was for that study, get the Uptown merchants together, let's make sure we got everything solid, make sure we feel good about designs and all the other good stuff in this earlier part. I think that's totally fine. But I think that if we pass a budget this year without any intentionality around this issue, we're going to kick the can down the road.
Well, there's always money in the budget for under transportation for studies. Then it becomes just a question of how do you prioritize spending what's there. Usually transportation has some idea when they make that budget request of what they want to spend it on.
and just as a reminder, we're doing studies on English right now for on-street parking. That study's about 65,000, and then we have the implementation. We're about to start a quiet zone for the railroad, and that's another 65,000, and then you have implementation costs. So your studies lay out what the costs are going to be, but then you've got to put aside the funds to implement it. So this will be the same thing. We have asked transportation to go ahead and start looking at the scope, redo or update this transportation plan for that area. So Greg is aware of that request, and they're starting to work on it.
Yeah, they've done some, I think Mark told me before he left that they had done some work in the past to estimate along there how many spaces we would gain. I never ended up seeing that, but I think it was at least in progress. I don't know. As far as that crosswalk is concerned, I would like for us to look at something that's maybe a little more outside the box for us. I go to a lot of different cities, and there are things like road mounted LED lights, and there's things you can do to help catch people's eye. I don't walk up to that area maybe as much as I used to, but I have walked up there a considerable amount of time because it's close to my house. And I can tell you firsthand that all the bells and whistles and signs and flashing lights and stuff we've put up there, the traffic still just doesn't stop. When they see a flashing yellow light, they think it's okay to drive through. And so you can press that button and stand there and wait a while. And then sooner or later, you have to be willing to risk your bodily integrity to go out and cross that street and just hope they stop. But I think we really ought to look at a lot of different options other than what we've just traditionally always done.
Where they're at on that project is they're going to install a camera there and look and review the PED crossings. We need some data, and we need to be able to take that to DOT because it is a DOT facility.
Yeah.
So that'll be the first step, is getting the camera up, getting some numbers, finding out, how much activity there is.
They may have already put a camera up there.
Yeah, they were going to move as quickly as they could to do
I think I
that.
saw something that looked like a new pole or something.
And then they're already talking about some of the solutions that have been used in other cities. Boone's got some devices called Hawk, And so, you know, is it possible to use something like that? And that crossing,
We did explore the option of having lights that were recessed for the road to actually shine out as you're driving and approaching a crosswalk.
Yep.
There seems to be some hesitation to use those from DOT as they feel like it compromises the integrity of the pavement over the long term. But those are options that we're floating different ideas with them. So we're having those conversations.
So part of the conversation is about speed on the street, safety of crossing the street, just like that. But I think another part that I'd like clarity around is location of these improvements, right? So we've mentioned Uptown, certainly between Lexington and I think that's Parkway where Krispy Kreme is at. That's often been a part of our discussion. But as we know, we really have this downtown that since that study was done and we looked at it way back in 2014, we've since created a new downtown that's got a social district that hasn't quite stretched out to Main Street, mostly because our Main Street near this, closer to our downtown and also. So in terms of location, are we looking at Main Street, in my mind, from, Lexington really up through a little ways coming down towards near MLK maybe, or even a couple blocks past that? Like, are we at least looking at the walkability there? There's a development happening right on the corner of High Street in Maine, hotels being redone. There's a number of shops and things there. I can tell you, I was at an event yesterday, and the business owner who owned the venue, she wanted to talk to me in private. So I came to come chat and sit down with her at her desk. She said, "Hey, I got to explain to you, we're having real concerns here. If it wasn't for the building owner here being, quite frankly, really compassionate and wanting to create activity where he gives them a decreased rent rate there, they wouldn't be able to stay there because they can't get people who want to come because there's not enough parking in the area. People come, and when people, they're like, I didn't even know this was here. I never even get out and walk around this area because I never know anything about it." She said, "We keep hearing you guys are going to do something about walkability, but when are you going to do it? We took the chance 2 years ago on coming here because we believe in what our downtown is doing. But at this point, we're almost wondering if we took the wrong chance." Now, I got to be honest, that touched a chord for me. As you guys know, I've talked about when our private sector businesses take a chance on the city, right? The city's been doing our part in a way in what our investments have been. But I think we've got to continue to be that really good partner with our businesses. If they're making the investment, how do we help protect the investment that they've made? Which, quite frankly, if we do that, I know the economic impact will see that ROI back on us. I would imagine that if we took the same sort of fervor that we did with like the stadium, for example, to really get the streets and walkability up, I think we'd finally see the kind of traffic that we're talking about getting, the kind of dollars that right now are going to other downtowns. I think we see them in our downtown. And then that impact, I think, would be incredible in terms of our city's revenue and our city's growth.
When she was talking to you, walkability means different things to different people. What do you think she was actually?
So she just mentioned that folks, for example, crossing right there at High in Maine, for example, and I can attest to it. I've parked right there next to Showplace West, where the old Nobles used to be. I parked right there and walked across to right there near that train station. I almost got hit. I was walking at a pretty fast speed, but the person had to be going at least 60 miles an hour because by the time they got to MLK, it wasn't about a second and a half before they were up to me. This is several blocks down the road. Yeah. And I had to run to literally not get hit. Someone said, "Man, what a story that would have told if Councilman Jefferson would have got hit." And I said, "No, maybe we
might have been able to get that done."
I said, "We probably would have got our street." But I think it's like that right there. It's just, it's that sort of thing right there. Because where she's at, those sidewalks actually are great sidewalks.
Yeah.
But it's everything that goes with it. I was talking to the Showplace West developer, and he's like, "Hey, do you think the timing of this will line up well? Because once we get this active, this development only works as long as there's a synergy amongst everything else."
Yeah, I've been at this a long time, and parking means more than one thing to people, and I mean, there's no shortage of parking downtown. I mean, if you're talking about that location, you're within 1 block of 3 parking decks, and in South
northeast and west of where that location is. Plus, there's free on-street parking everywhere. You know, so we don't, if your definition of parking is parking in front of the business and walking 10 feet to the door, then, you know, that's not realistic. But if you just want a place to park and you're willing to walk a block, how many spaces do you want? We got more parking than we know what to do with. The issue with a street like Main Street, or really any street, is people drive as fast as they're comfortable driving. And you can set an artificial speed limit. We could drop it to 20 miles an hour right now if we want, but all we're going to do is create more criminals. You know, I mean, people are going to drive as fast as the design of the street makes them comfortable driving. And, you know, the only way to really slow traffic down is to somehow squeeze the street lanes, or, you know, do things that create friction for the driver that is going to force them to slow down, because they don't feel safe driving the speed they're driving. They'll slow down. And so, you know, some people say that the way to do it is to make the street less safe. If you make the street too safe, people drive too fast. That's not a great way to put it, but that's kind of how it is. But you know, we've got crosswalks, and we've got the crossing lights, and, you know, it's the design of the street. Plus, it's a change in thought too. We have a downtown that has never had a lot of people for a long, long time. You know, for at least 4 decades, we've not really had much going on in the downtown. 5 decades probably. Since the 70s, there's not been a whole lot going on in the downtown other than the market, and people are used to being able to drive through there and not see pedestrians, you know. And as things change and you get to see more people walking around downtown, there's going to be some change in lifestyle for people who are driving through there. I'm more aware of the area they're in and the fact that there are more pedestrians moving around. And that's kind of growing pains and the pain of change. I see Greg nodding with me.
Is this a conversation about how far we take down Main? I think at some point it was
Mhm.
but it sounds like there's a conversation around how far do we come down to Commerce?
The original discussion with,
Shadow South right there, and,
Yeah.
you know, winery and everything that's right there near BB Truist, that whole section also, I mean.
It might need to come all the way down, I don't have Commerce, what's the next?
Green.
Green.
Yeah, Green,
Maybe
yeah.
go all the way.
well, I think there's at least an argument to be made from the northern edge of the Market District up to Lexington. But you really have nodes of areas where people are maybe doing a lot of walking, you know. The area around the doghouse with where Dr. Peters is building buildings right now, eventually you're going to have a lot more people moving around that area, and down towards Panel South. Certainly because you got Church Street coming in there, those businesses are starting to flip towards more retail and downtown pedestrian-oriented type businesses. Then there's kind of a gap really between Westwood and maybe the library. There's a little bit of a gap because you got the hospital in there and a few other things that are more car-oriented. But yeah, I think it's worth looking at that, especially with the change that's coming, for us to at least try to get ahead of it a little bit. But really along there, you got, in some places, you almost have, I mean, you could call it 7 lanes. You got 2 parking lanes, 4 lanes of traffic, and a turn lane. I mean, that's pretty wide.
That's like a highway.
Yeah, but I mean, at least you've already got on-street parking there, though. I mean, the biggest thing for safety of pedestrians is you want a line of trees and a line of cars.
Yeah.
And that'll make the person walking on the sidewalk feel that they've got a barrier, you know, between them and the traffic. In the uptown area that, you know, 10 years ago, that was really about the only area in the city High Point where you had an established commercial district that was in walking distance of neighborhoods. Pretty much everywhere else, if you wanted to go to a restaurant or something, you had to get in your car and go. And so that, at the time, that was kind of why that area was thought of as being a little bit special, you know, that it was low-hanging fruit, so to speak, that if we wanted to go do something and we did it there, that we'd get more bang for our buck, because you already have on east and west side within Blosh, you had an established residential neighborhoods where there was enough income to support the businesses that were there and people could walk to them. That was kind of the initial discussion on that. And then, you know, of course, we're not there yet with downtown, but it's coming.
Absolutely.
It's coming.
And more and more businesses, I mean, you hear about the cigar lounge, just moving on Main Street, about to do a grand opening.
That's the old Pizza Hut.
Yeah, and the old Pizza Hut, you got wine, you got that micro winery.
Winery's coming.
Well,
We're going to have more people down there with people coming to the Children's Museum too. If we start getting some restaurants in that area. I don't think many of those kids are going to go to the cigar lounge. But
No. But they may want to go to the library.
yeah, they will. There'll be traffic back and forth. But we've already got a plan.
The Greenway will help.
We've already got a plan with that, you know, with the Motley project or Cabane Avenue project now, and then the streetscaping on Elm. So,
So
but it's
it sounds-
certainly, it's good to work. I'm sorry to
No,
keep
no.
interrupting you, but I
good.
think you're on the right track. I think it's something that we need to at least start to study and see what we can do. And you got to deal with DOT too.
No, Lexington, the uptown area, this is not something that we're starting. These conversations have been happening
For
for several years.
for around 10 years.
Yeah, it's not something that we just haven't been paying attention to. I mean, how many emails have we had in 1 week's time talking about the crosswalk round truck? He personally has sent 4 emails, so it's still something that we're still working on.
It's been an ongoing problem since we started, really.
And Chris does too. Chris is involved with that too. You know, that Main Street splits our 2 districts.
So would you all like to see a specific funding that's allocated in our
Yeah.
budget to begin the study? And it really
Where the
it
funds
sounds
might
like-
be.
It sounds like we are expanding the scope a little bit further to go past Parkway, which was the initial study area for the project.
Yeah,
Several years ago.
and if these things have to be done in phases, I
Well-
think we'd all understand that.
But I think we at least need to start the study and identify what our boundaries are, because that will also help staff have a better idea of pricing as we're working with consultants. But if we could initially have money in the budget for this first round of study, understand at least what our boundaries are, clearly, we're going to have to come back and we'll still have to prioritize the projects when it comes time to implementation. Because when you do these, you want to make sure that you're handling, as our deputy manager said, utilities and all at one time. So we don't make all these improvements and have to go back and.
Well, they did have those districts already kind of
We do.
labeled out, which is why the utilities were, done in this district, because that's where the next district stops. So,
Yeah.
they are kind of.
Yeah, all the work's been done all the way to Parkway.
Yeah.
All the undergrounding, all replacing.
Parkway to-
Pipes, all that.
Oh, what's the, that's not state. What's the end of the uptown district, okay? No, it's beyond, it's where it's.
Talking about south or north?
It's the corner where Goldberg's coming in. It is state.
Yes.
Yeah, that's- yeah.
It goes from Parkway to State, so that's really the next section.
Yeah, and I'll tell you,
Lexington's already been done.
I know we talked about,
Stuff's in there.
just FYI, I know we talked about stopping at Lexington, but you sit out at Brewer's Kettle and you want to go grab you something to eat across the street. I've done that run several times, running across the 98, or leaving Q's Corner with my family and wanting to come grab something to eat at Magnolia.
Yeah.
I put them in my Denali and cross the street.
Yeah.
Even though literally it would have been faster for me to walk if it was safe. So I've had people ask me about right there too, just because there's so many businesses, that whole corridor where companies coming and the Boba Tea and 98 and Q's Corner and the gym, and then you've got Magnolia Blue and you've got the donut place and you've got the dentist offices, everything that's just in there too.
I think the wise choice, though, would be to try to concentrate first on the areas where we have more urban design, where the buildings are up on the street. Because most people don't walk,
Those are new.
most people don't walk past parking lots. I mean, they don't. People tend to walk around in areas where they have something interesting to see, or they have a place they're specifically going, but people who are going to come and spend the evening and walk around, they're not going to walk past parking lots and blank walls and whatnot. So if we're going to prioritize things, I think we need to look at the areas that have more of an urban style of development first, because that's where we're going to get more of the people walking than areas that were built in the 60s and 70s for car-oriented development. The city is transitioning, part of that too, with the creation of the Main Street District, and you'll I know people are complaining about the new advanced auto parts store, but they'll have to comply with the downtown, Main Street development, design standards. So I'm kind of interested to see what that building's going to look like, because I've never seen kind of an urban auto parts store, you know, except maybe in a big city.
Well, it's going to look like the building next to it. It'll be brick. I mean, it will have the front, but the front facade, Lexington side will be brick with nice fronts. Parking will be behind
It. And it's, but
Very much like Gold
there's requirements for a certain percentage of glass on the
Yep.
building, and so
It's a
I'm,
very nice design for a building.
yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see what it looks like, because, you know, even with a place like Zaxby's, you know, it's, the parking's around on the sides and the building's built up to the front. And a lot of that's, over the next decades, as those design standards, as those buildings, you know, rotate in and out, you'll see that area have a more of an urban look, and it may have some more walking. But anyway, Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, just to put one thing out on the radar, and this is not a today discussion, but you will be approached as the showroom district creeps to the south to make additional investment in the road network and in aesthetics and underground utilities. As that progression goes, the streetscape has ended at Russell. There's around Russell and Wren and Maine, you get to the edge of the aesthetic area and the walkable area. So that's going to be a pressure that's coming sooner than later.
Yeah. You know what might not be a bad idea. This may sound silly, but honestly, it might not be a bad idea to have the whole council and have a meeting on Main Street and just walk it with some staff. Go out and just walk it. Okay? One
Maybe
day.
a manager's meeting to say, here are the districts, here is
I know we could probably all use the exercise.
because there are different restrictions.
There you go.
Depending on where you are in the district, there are code and zoning restrictions for.
Yeah, I mean, you can't really see what's going on in an area by driving by. You got to take the time and walk through it slow and kind of see what's going on. And I'm sure we can come up with quite a list of improvements that need to be made just by getting out and walking it ourselves. So we might want to, I think that might not be a bad idea.
And I'll tell you, the reason why I brought up the Main Street, we had that Brew Fest 2 weeks ago here at Mendenhall Station, right out here.
Yeah.
Which apparently was fantastic. Marathon that morning, or whatever you call it. So there was a group of young professionals, and it had to be 30 or 40 of them. They all had on these shirts or whatever. They just started bar hopping. So they started right at, I think it was like Paddle South of Plank Street, and they bar hopped all the way up to Brewer's Kettle.
Yeah, I saw them out walking.
They went up to Brewer's Kettle. They stopped at After Hours Tavern right there. That's before you get to State Street. They stopped there. Then they went up to Brewer's Kettle as well. And I asked some of them, they were like, yeah, you know, we were just in town for this brew fest. We said, why not? Let's check out their scenery. I will tell you though, it was a little awkward seeing 20 people trying to fit on our sidewalk that was like this skinny. They were like, I mean, from the first person to the person way in the back, there was no hope of conversation. They had to just wait till they got there.
Yeah.
But it was cool to see people bar hopping in that way. And I've had friends who have invited me. As a matter of fact, I think we're going to try to hit 12 of them coming up. We're not going to drink it all. We're not gonna, but I think we're going to try to hit, because there's 12 apparently between Brewer's Kettle and Wine.
Yeah.
So.
I went to a conference one year in San Francisco, and one of the things that we did was they broke us into a lot of groups, and then they assigned us each one block to go to and evaluate the walkability of that block. And so we had a team of maybe 8 people. And so we each went to a different area, and we just strolled this block slowly and looked at the quality of the sidewalks, the quality of the curb and gutter, whether the crosswalks were safe, you know, and they even gave us kind of a checklist to look at as what did the signage look like? Did it have adequate crossing lights, you know? And that was an interesting exercise for me, because sometimes you don't realize all the different elements that go into good walkability, you know, and learning how to spot those things, you know. It might be, I don't know, maybe I can dig through my stuff and find that old checklist somewhere and
And I tell you what, the idea of walking it, like you said, a group of council going out and walking that.
Yeah.
Let me ask Tommy in here.
oh, yeah, hey, Tom, I didn't see, we just wanted you here. That's all. We just like how you look, man. No. I think the question was just the justification for the two, battalion fire chief positions. Give us your thoughts on
Okay.
that.
All right, so, right now we have 2 battalion chiefs assigned to each shift. We have 3 shifts, A, B, and C. There's 19 frontline fire companies that run every day, 20 counting the tanker when we added from the county last year. We had 20 frontline companies running every day. So each one of them is managing 10 companies. When I say 10 companies, that's 3 to 4 people on each truck. So what happens is when we have a fire, there's 2 things is, both of them have to ride because one of them is going to run the scene and one of them has to be safety. As standards change and compliance and keep OSHA off of us, 2 in, 2 out, and comply with everything, you about got to have somebody there that's the safety watchdog to watch everything. Used to, fireman was kind of like the military. You just done what you want to do and went on. Nobody bothers you. Now they come in and fine you. So the standard's always been like 1 to 7 is a span of control and 5 is optimal. So me and Angela in HR, we've been working for 2 or 3 years. We've been asking and trying to get to this level where there's 3 battalion chiefs on each shift. Right now, we got one about 2 years ago, so we consider him like a rover. So he's assigned to A shift, but if somebody's off on B or C shift, he has to go work that shift. So theoretically, you still really only have 2. And so if we got these 2, that would give us 3 on each shift. So even when one's on vacation, there's still 2 or there. But what it does is span of control. We divide the city into 3 battalions, and that gives each one of them, like 2 of them will have 6 companies and one of them will have 7 companies. So we have closed that gap a little bit on the standard and as far as span of control, which is not optimal, but it's more manageable. And then on the other thing is when we have a fire in, which we still have fires, quite a few of them seems like, but it gives us 2 battalion chiefs, one that's running the scene and one is a safety officer, and it allows us to have another battalion chief that takes care of the rest of the city. So that's the push behind it. Right now, I was looking at the numbers. Each battalion chief, as far as the numbers, they're like Battalion 2 had 7,178 calls in it last year. Battalion 1 had 5,210 calls in it, and Battalion 3 had 3,400 calls in that. In Battalion 3, we consider that to be the extreme north end, and it's like everything. It's growing in leaps and bounds. Just like the Leo terror stuff the other night. I mean, people are building houses. They're building apartments. They're bringing people in, which is a good thing, but it creates other issues for us. So what we're trying to do is get to where it's manageable and get a little bit more closer to the standard. And it's I don't say it's a struggle, but a lot of times it's a struggle. If we have situations like in COVID, where we had to pull people out of the office to ride as a battalion chief because you got a battalion chief out with COVID and another one that's sick or whatever. So we make do with whatever we have to. We're just trying to get to that position. And I think this is probably the 3rd or 4th year that we've asked for this. And so it's not a new problem. It's just something we're trying to fix. Hope that kind of helps you understand a little bit.
Is there a relationship to the hiring of these 2 chiefs to our rating? You guys have the highest rating, right?
For the what now?
For your department.
To maintain our rating. Our
Maintain-
ISO
Oh, yeah.
rating.
Our ISO rating.
Absolutely. So when they done our accreditation study, if you sit down and looked at that, everything that we asked for in our budget, like those administrative positions for training, the battalion chiefs, the plan reviewer, all that stuff comes out of the ISO and accreditation model where they come in, they study, and obviously they want you at an optimal level. You know, you may not be at the very top, but we're trying to get closer to the middle from the bottom. So, but these positions absolutely will help us create that because, when they come in, they rate us on ISO. They don't rate us on the service that we deliver on the street. They rate us on how we treat our employees. They rate us on the city's financial impact. Everything, HR, everything that we do comes into part of that rating because obviously, if our fire department is no better than the city management or anything else that runs us and funds us and keeps us going. So it's a complete package.
I know it took us a long time, and that was a long-term goal, was to get to that high ISO
Oh,
rating.
absolutely.
And I know that was well earned,
Yeah.
to get to that level.
So, I mean, you know, obviously, the last thing I want you to do is cut them, but, you know, life will go on, but we'll live with it. We'll just ask again next year, but, I'd love to have them. It just helps us in reality, like talking to our people and dealing with morale, dealing with personnel issues and all, you know, they look at like, well, why come we can't get this? You know, they look at other departments and so forth. And obviously we can't give them everything they want, but each little step that we do to where we get to be a little bit better and we look like we're taking better care of them and we try, because that's our goal is to protect the citizens of this city and the people that come to work each day and get on a fire truck for them to go home the next day safe. So that's everything that we do is calculated. I can assure you there's no frills. No, we're in the fire department and,
Yeah, I know that, it's something you've been seeking for a while, and a lot of things had to be put on hold, especially 2 years ago with our COVID budget, because there was so much unknown. And it didn't turn out to be as bad as we thought it was gonna be, which was, at least from a budgetary standpoint, which was nice. But, thank you for, any questions for the chief? Anything coming out of, Public Safety Committee? Is this something y'all have talked about, or?
No, I mean, Chief reached us last month, I think it was, April, yeah, about their updates and just told them to put anything they needed in the budget.
I'm going to say one other thing. I know Mr. Ferguson had asked me about like the trucks and the frontline apparatus, and I don't know if that was part of this discussion, but I got the correct numbers now. But so actually on a daily basis, we're running 21 frontline apparatus. That's including the tanker that we just put in service last year for ISO rating. We've got 8 specialty units, and we've got 8 reserve apparatus that, so when you look at trucks sitting in station, what we're required as far as ISO and accreditation, for every 5 apparatus that we run on the road, the city has to keep a reserve. So if something breaks, whatever, that we just put them right in there while we work on something else. So we've got a lot of apparatus on the road, but there are 21 that's running every day on the road out there, and like everybody else, fuel, getting parts, everything's killing us right now. So anyway, so thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Can I make a suggestion? Well, a couple of things. Why don't we take what's been presented today, and I think we probably we want to meet on Monday as well. There's a closed session item for economic development that we want to talk about on that day. And so I believe the clerk's office is going to, maybe Lisa or Mary, are y'all looking at renoticing that meeting and adding the economic development closed session item? Oh, okay, good.
If needed.
Yeah. So, okay, yeah, let's do that and make sure we add that economic development closed session item for that special meeting. But my suggestion, and you're certainly welcome to object to it, is that we take what's been presented here today, and then if any other council folks have any suggestions about possible cuts to the budget that were not presented, that we be ready to present those on Monday.
Actually, by the end of the week, so we can have it ready by Monday. Is that possible?
Okay.
Yeah, we can have it ready for the work session.
So yeah, if
We
any.
could get it.
That's fine, yeah, if any of you, correction on that, if the manager has asked that if you could try to get any of those ideas to her by tomorrow, that way staff could try to have, some evaluation of what potential impact might be. So if anybody on council has any additional proposed cuts beyond this that might get us to, to an additional cut in the tax rate, please have those to the manager by tomorrow, and, we'll meet again on Monday, unless somebody else has got something they want to bring up today.
23rd? Same.
23rd,
At 3 p.m.
3 o'clock.
Mentioned maybe looking at what we may include in the budget for this
Well-
transportation studies.
Yeah.
We'll include a placeholder in terms of a cost, an initial cost for us to begin the study for Main Street. So we'll add that to it.
Because there's more to think about here, in terms of what's been presented today, and then, but I'd be interested to see if anybody has any ideas. So, are we good? Okay. Well, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second. Okay. Motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.